palace at Versailles, France in the year 1789. The court of King Louis XVI. In spite of many financial problems, France appears to have a stable government. But a chain of events has begun that will bring drastic changes, not only to France, but to all of Western civilization. By force of arms, as well as by parliamentary debate, the French Revolution will change the structure of society and create a new spirit of nationalism. The banner of a monarchy that has lasted 1,000 years will be replaced by the tricolor flag of a new French Republic. In May of 1789, no one can foresee the violent changes that lie in store for France. It is true that King Louis XVI has been struggling with a major financial crisis. His government is deeply in debt, due in part to the role of France in the American Revolution. By helping the American colonies achieve their independence, France had struck a blow at her longtime enemy, England. But the war had been devastating to the treasury of the French king, a treasury already being pushed toward bankruptcy by the cost of maintaining a lavish royal court and an inefficient system of government. Hoping to solve the financial crisis through changes in the system of taxation, the king has reluctantly called a meeting of the national legislature, the Estates General, its first meeting in nearly 200 years. May of 1789. From every part of France, delegates to the Estates General are journeying to Versailles. The Estates General, like the population as a whole, is divided into three classes, or estates. Georges Roget is a lawyer and a delegate for the Third Estate, by far the largest of the three. The Third Estate includes the peasant farmers, who make up 90% of the French population. Some peasants own their own land, but many live on land controlled either by the nobility, who form the Second Estate, or by the clergy, who form the First Estate. And because of the special privileges enjoyed by the members of the first two estates, it is left to the people of the Third Estate to pay most of the heavy taxes that support the government. But not all members of the Third Estate are peasant farmers. Like Monsieur Roget himself, many of them live in towns and cities. These people are called bourgeoisie. Monsieur Favre, a client of Georges Roget, is a businessman. Capable, intelligent, and well-educated, Favre has often expressed a desire for an appointment as a government official. But government service is one of the privileges reserved for members of the first two estates. Favre hopes for reforms that will do away with such restrictions. The need for sweeping social and political reforms is the main concern of Roget and other delegates for the Third Estate. In every town along the way, he hears the call for reform. The families of craftsmen and unskilled workers often face great hardship, and some have been reduced to the brink of starvation. In the assembling of the Estates General, they find hope that the abuses of the class system will at last be corrected. This hope of reform has been brightened somewhat by the king's reappointment of Monsieur Necker as finance minister. Necker is attempting to reduce government extravagance and collect more taxes from the privileged classes. Stopping overnight at an inn outside of Paris, Roget meets several other delegates who are en route to the Estates General. Each of the delegates for the Third Estate has been elected by a special assembly in his district, and he brings with him a cahier, a list of grievances drawn up by his electoral assembly. To correct these grievances, the Third Estate will demand several basic reforms in the French system of government. In another room of the inn are several delegates of the First and Second Estates, clergymen and nobles. A few of them are sympathetic to the demands of the Third Estate, but most are determined to use the Estates General to maintain their privileges and increase their own authority. In fact, it was for this very reason that the First and Second Estates had forced the king to call a meeting of the Estates General. The outcome, as Monsieur Roget explains to the innkeeper's son, may well depend on how delegate votes are counted in the Estates General. It is easy to illustrate with a few chess pieces, representing the king and each of the three estates. In past assemblies, each estate met separately and voted as a unit. So the Third Estate, although representing most of the population, was always outvoted 2 to 1. But this time, the Third Estate will insist that each delegate should have an equal vote. Now, the Third Estate has as many delegates as the other two estates combined. Under this voting system, the members of the Third Estate might achieve their goals. They can count on the help of some prominent members of the first two estates. There is Count Mirabeau, a nobleman, who has been elected as a delegate for the Third Estate. The Marquis de Lafayette, another French nobleman and a hero of the American Revolution, also favors reform. But as Georges Roget approaches Versailles on the last day of the journey, he knows that the plan of the Third Estate will meet with strong opposition. At the first session of the Estates General, all of the delegates meet together for a speech by Monsieur Necker. They are then dismissed and ordered to meet separately. But the Third Estate refuses to conduct any business unless all three estates meet as one body. The result is a stalemate, lasting for 5 weeks. Then, suddenly, a bold action. The delegates of the Third Estate declare themselves the National Assembly and the only true representatives of the French people. And a few days later, because the king has locked them out of their meeting hall, they meet in an indoor tennis court and take an oath. They will not disband until they have given France a constitution. Meanwhile, in nearby Paris, the stage is set for another bold action in defiance of the king. Rising prices and a shortage of food have created growing unrest and demands for reform. When Swiss soldiers, hired by the French king, are ordered into Paris, the people react in anger. It appears that the king means to crush the reform movement by force. Citizens of Paris are joined by discontented French soldiers and form a mob. July 14th, 1789. The mob converges on the Bastille, a fortress, prison, and symbol of oppression. The Bastille falls to the mob, and the French Revolution has begun. As the news spreads to the countryside, peasant farmers begin a wave of violence against their aristocratic landlords. Fearing for their lives, many noblemen hurriedly prepare to flee from France, often hoping that foreign rulers will help them turn back the tide of revolution. Other nobles have chosen to remain, to surrender their rank and privileges and cooperate with the National Assembly. The old order, the traditional way of life, has come to an abrupt end. And soon, Violence is directed against the king himself. A mob from Paris storms the palace at Versailles. The king is forced to move from the royal apartments in Versailles to a palace in Paris. The National Assembly will also move to Paris to continue the work of preparing a constitution. While in Versailles, they have completed the first part of the Constitution, a preamble called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen that echoes the American Declaration of Independence. It reads, "Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Rights to liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression." Work on the new Constitution will continue for almost 2 years and will give France a new form of government, a constitutional monarchy. But while many nobles and clergymen have given up their privileges, the king cannot easily adjust to his new role as constitutional monarch. In 1791, he attempts to flee from France, hoping to gain foreign support that will help restore his lost power. But he is soon captured and, as represented in this cartoon, he becomes a virtual prisoner of the new government. Returned to Paris and forced to accept the new constitution, he continues to hope for aid from foreign rulers. In 1792, when France is invaded by Austria and Prussia, rumors spread that the king has conspired with the enemy. A Paris mob attacks the palace and massacres the king's bodyguards. The royal family is arrested. The constitutional monarchy has failed, and a new government must be formed to replace it. In September, a newly formed and radical national convention declares that France is now a republic. The former king is placed on trial for treason. The verdict? Guilty. The sentence? Death by guillotine. Throughout France, the Republic is proclaimed. Its slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity. Political power has now shifted to the leaders of the radical Jacobin faction, including Danton and Robespierre. They are men of high ideals who believe they can create a better world. But these ideals are a threat to the royal governments of other nations. Joining Austria and Prussia in a coalition against France are Great Britain, Spain, and Holland. Within France, by 1793, fear of invasion is combined with a fanatical devotion to the goals of the revolution. The French leaders take strong action against all opposition. Anyone who criticizes the government is in danger of arrest. A reign of terror, led by Robespierre, has begun. In increasing numbers, people are being convicted and carried off in carts called tumbrils to the guillotine. Even members of the government, including Danton, are victims of the reign of terror. But then there is a sudden reversal. On July 27, 1794, Robespierre is wounded by soldiers who have been sent to arrest him and his followers. They have been denounced by members of the National Convention, who fear for their own lives. Robespierre himself is sentenced to the guillotine. The execution of Robespierre and his followers brings an end to the reign of terror. The National Convention now sets to work to complete a new constitution that will create a stable government for the Republic of France. But in 1795, there is a final uprising by royalists protesting the new constitution. It is a minor threat easily handled by the National Guard. The incident will be remembered mainly because of the public attention it will bring to the young officer who commands the troops, Napoleon Bonaparte. The French Revolution has been one of the most violent episodes of history, and many of the goals of people like Georges Roget will remain unfulfilled for many years. But the revolution has succeeded in breaking down the old order with its rigid class structure. And the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity have set a new pattern that will help to shape the future course of Western civilization.